This chapter is about unit testing, which is a very developer-centric type of test. Let me start with my definition of a unit test. A unit test is an automated chunk of code that calls a class or method and verifies that our assumptions about the behavior of the code under test are correct. Unit tests are commonly written using a unit testing framework. They should always be automated and easily accessible. Anyone on your team should be able to run the unit tests at any time to verify that the code under test is working and that no one has broken the build. Let's look at the unit testing tools inside Visual Studio. I'm going to be working with this project called Working with Unit Tests. First, let me show you the code I'm going to test. It's inside this book class. Double click on the book class, and you'll see that this class has one property called title, one property with a getter and a setter, and a property called price. And then I have two methods, update price by %, and save book. Now here's a question for you. How do you know what to test in your code? My general feeling is that you only need to test code that contains logic statements. So if your method has a loop construct or an if statement or contains a calculation, it needs to be tested. Not all code qualifies, however. It's a waste of time to test simple property getters. So looking at this code up here, it doesn't make any sense to test this because there's no calculations going on. I'll write my first unit test by going to the test menu and choosing new test. Within this dialog, I need to pick my testing language. I'll choose C#, and then I'll click on this unit test template. Most often, you're going to write your unit tests and the code at the same time. There are many in the developer community that advocate writing your tests first before writing any code. This is known as test-driven development. I agree with many of their principles, but for this movie, I'm adding tests to pre-written code. I'm going to call my unit test book unit test, and then I'm going to click OK. Visual Studio realizes I do not have a test project yet, so it prompts me for a name for my new project. That looks like a great name for a unit testing project. I'll click on Create, and then on OK on this dialog. Several things happened in my project. First of all, a new folder was added called Solution Items with a few test items in there. Then a new unit test project was added, including this C# file down here, book unit test. Let's see what's inside here. Double click. Here's the class that's going to contain my testing code. And the way we tell the unit testing framework that this is a test class is by putting this test class attribute on the class itself. And then each method that I want to write that's going to test my code is going to be marked with this test method. That's so that the unit testing framework can find this method. Let me show you another way of adding a unit test. I'll use a wizard this time. I'll click on this unit test wizard, verify that it's going to go in my unit test project, click OK, and then over here, I need to save my changes to my project. I'm going to select the class that I want to test. Test this book class, and I only need to test the save book and the update price by % methods. So I'll unselect everything else and then click OK. This time, it wrote a slightly better test class. If you'll notice, my test methods now say save book class, and there's a little bit of sample test code in here. Now I'm going to delete these and put my own in here. I've already pre-written the code for these tests. They're in this assets folder. I'm going to first start by using this increaseprice.txt file. Double click on this one and copy all of this code and then paste it in booktest.cs. I think I just double clicked on the title. I've detached this from the window. The way you put it back is you control and then double click on the header. Paste my code in. Here's my test method attribute. And the way I like to name my tests is by using the name of the method that I'm going to test, the scenario that I'm testing, and the expected behavior. It makes for a long name, but any developer that's looking at this test knows what is expected to do. Now, what am I doing in my test case? I'm instantiating an instance of that class, the book class. I'm trying to verify that this update price by % function works the way I want, which is I pass in a value and it updates the price. So first I'm going to set a price for the book. Then I'm going to call my update price by %. And then I'm going to use one of the test classes, which is called assert. I'm going to use that to verify that the results are what I expect them to be. There are a number of assert methods. If you look at the assert class itself, you can see there are lots of test methods here. Are the same. There's a method called isFalse, another one down here called isNull, is not null. I've picked one called are equal. And the syntax for this is you pass in the expected value, and then you pass in the actual value, and the assert will verify whether these are correct or not. So what am I doing? I'm asserting that I should have 10 times 0.05, and then I'm saying, now look at the book class and see if it has that value. Let's run the test. To run the test, I will go to the test menu, choose this window submenu, and choose Test List Editor. I'll then build my project, which will build my test and my regular project. And it shows two test methods. The one that I just wrote down here is the update price by percent. I'll put a check mark here, and then I'll come up and run check tests. At the bottom half of the screen, you'll see that there is a passed result. It says test run is complete. I did one test passed. You want to have all green lights down here. Now, what happens if a developer comes along and goes to this book class and makes a mistake? They look at this code and go, oh, I'm going to refactor this. Maybe I should have been dividing. So they make this change and they compile the application. I did a Control-Shift-B to compile the application this time. Then when you run the unit test the next time, go over here and do a refresh. And then when I run my unit test, that developer immediately sees that change they made 10 minutes ago is causing one of our unit tests to fail. So they're going to go back and look immediately and say, what did I do to break the build? Let's go back and fix that code because I want all green lights in a few minutes. Go back over here and switch this back to multiply. Now I've got two more tests I want to add to book test. And what I'm verifying this time is that the save book method is working the way I expect. So look what happens if I try to save the book. I look at the price that's currently stored in the book class. And if it's less than 0, then I throw an argument out of range exception. And if the price is larger than 90, I throw the same argument out of range exception. So when I write my test cases, I need to make sure that if you pass in a negative value, it throws that exception. So let's go to save book number 1 and copy this code. Go to my book test class and paste it in. And then I might as well bring over the other bit of code while I'm at it. I'll go over here and get this save book 2 and copy this code and paste it in book test. Then I'll build the project. And then I'll step through the code and show you what it's doing. In this first test, I'm instantiating the book, I'm setting a negative price, and then I'm attempting to save the book. In the second test, I'm doing exactly the same thing, only I'm setting an $80 price and saving the book. Right, now I expect this method to throw an exception, so I put this attribute up here to tell the testing harness it's okay if it throws an exception. In fact, I expect it to throw an exception, and this is the exception I expect, argument out of range. Then we'll go test our code. Switch over to the test editor. You see there's 2 new unit tests listed here. I'll check both of those and then run my tests. And down on the bottom of the screen, you see that the update price by percent passed, the -1 passed because it threw that exception, but this one's not throwing an exception. And why not? Let's go look at my test code. Because I didn't pass in a number that was higher than 90. So if I change this value to 90.01, rebuild my application, switch over to the test editor, and run my tests again, I get all green lights. This is what you're looking for. Every time you write code, you write a unit test, you write the conditions that you want to test, and then you run your tests every time you make a change in your code. You make sure you haven't broken any of your pre-existing tests. Now, there are other assertive conditions that you should explore when you have time. And in the next movie, I'll show you another type of test called performance testing.